Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. A US-backed aid group in Gaza are to halt distribution today as the IDF warns that nearby roads will be considered combat zones following the death of dozens of Palestinians seeking aid. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council is set to vote on a Gaza ceasefire demand. Ukraine has denounced Russia's demands for peace as old ultimatums, as the White House says US President Donald Trump is willing to sanction Russia if necessary. Meanwhile, Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky announces a military shakeup. The US tariff rate imposed on most imported steel and aluminium has doubled to 50% after President Trump signed an executive order confirming the move. The United Kingdom are, however, exempt from the tariff hike due to a preliminary trade deal. Meanwhile, global automakers have joined US counterparts in voicing concern over restrictions by China on the export of rare earth alloys, which could impact production. In April, China decided to suspend exports of a wide range of critical minerals, seen by some experts as leverage in the ongoing US trade war. South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, has vowed to move on from the turmoil of the martial law crisis and revive the economy after a decisive election victory. Lee wins 49.4% of the vote after heavy turnout following a snap election after political chaos. Police have confirmed that one person has died and 5 others have been left with non-life-threatening gunshot wounds after a mass shooting in Toronto, Canada. Local media report that the incident occurred in the Lawrence Heights neighbourhood of North York. Billionaire Elon Musk has slammed President Trump's new tax bill as a disgusting abomination, stating it will increase the federal deficit. Musk, who left his special government position last week, added on his social media platform X, "Shame on those who voted for it." Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says that Tehran won't bow to US pressure on a nuclear program. Meanwhile, the New York Times report that the US has proposed an interim deal allowing some uranium enrichment. We start this hour in the Middle East. The US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, known as GHF, will suspend all aid distribution on Wednesday as it urges the Israeli military to take greater steps in safeguarding civilians beyond the perimeter of its food distribution sites. This decision comes after dozens of Palestinians seeking aid were killed in an incident near one of its centres. The GHF stated that it has requested the Israeli military to help guide civilian foot traffic near aid locations to reduce confusion and potential escalation. An Israeli military spokesperson, however, warned civilians against moving in areas surrounding the aid distribution zones on Wednesday, labelling them as combat zones. The Israeli army said it had opened fire on what it perceived as a threat near a GHF food centre. Additionally, the IDF has said that it is investigating the incident. Let's take a listen.
מוקדם יותר היום, כוחות צה"ל ביצעו ירי הרחקה כחצי קילומטר ממתחם החלוקה, לעבר חשודים שהתקרבו לעברם באופן שסיכן את ביטחונם, את ביטחון הלוחמים. האירוע מתוחקר וגם פה נגיע לחקר האמת. אנחנו לא מונעים הגעה של תושבי עזה למתחמי חלוקת הסיוע. ההפך הוא הנכון. אנחנו מאפשרים. חמאס הוא זה שמונע.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council is set to vote on a draft resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the release of hostages and large-scale unrestricted humanitarian access throughout the territory. In Washington, the White House said it is reviewing the veracity of reports that Israeli forces opened fire on civilians at an aid distribution centre. Let's listen in to what the White House press secretary had to say.
Is this administration aware of these? And I mean, what is being done to address this situation?
The administration is aware of those reports, and we are currently looking into the veracity of them because, unfortunately, unlike some in the media, we don't take the word of Hamas with total truth. We like to look into it when they speak.
Meanwhile, the GHF, which has operated in Gaza for just over a week, continues to face heavy criticism from the United Nations and multiple humanitarian groups who accuse it of undermining neutrality and militarizing the aid process. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also condemned the deaths of Palestinians seeking food as unacceptable, adding that the continuing loss of civilian life in Gaza was unthinkable. Let's have a listen to the spokesperson for the UN.
I can tell you that once again we are witnessing unthinkable loss of life in Gaza. The Secretary General condemns the loss of lives and injuries of Palestinians seeking aid in Gaza. It is unacceptable. Civilians are risking and in several instances losing their lives just trying to get food. Palestinians have the fundamental right to adequate food and to be free from hunger. The Secretary General continues to call for an immediate and independent investigation into these events and for the perpetrators to be held to account.
The war in Gaza erupted in October 2023 after Hamas attacked Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking around 250 hostages. Since then, Israel's military campaign has reportedly killed over 54,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza health authorities. Well, joining us to discuss all of the updates in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict is Ross Feingold, a political analyst who is joining us from Taipei. Ross, as always, thank you ever so much for being here. It seems that Israel are now acknowledging that there have been civilian deaths surrounding aid centres, this one of multiple now instances that have been reported from within Gaza. What pressure do you think needs to be placed on Israel to make sure that this isn't repeated?
Certainly, Israel is responsive to pressure from countries that typically are friendly to Israel, like the Western European countries. We have to see if the United States is going to criticize Israel. That's probably unlikely. But at the same time, Israel is saying that we did open a safe corridor for civilians to queue up to receive aid, and a lot of the civilians strayed from the safe corridor, leading to fire from Israeli troops. So, as is often the case in a war zone, there are two sides to the story. Israel says they're going to do an investigation, although frankly they rarely discipline their troops for these kinds of incidents. But it is possible that civilians, given the large volume of people trying to queue up for the food aid, they did stray from the safe corridor, wound up in combat zones, and we have to keep in mind that this is a combat zone. There are ongoing hostilities between Israel and Hamas.
Yes, Ross, given the current split between world leaders and humanitarian bodies, as well as organisations like the UN, in terms of Israel and their role in the ongoing humanitarian situation in Gaza, do you think that Israel labelling areas around an aid centre as a combat zone is a beneficial thing for them to do amid heightened scrutiny on the world stage?
Certainly from a public relations standpoint, it's not going to help Israel win any friends from among its critics. But we have to also understand the reality that this is a combat zone. Hamas has not been defeated. They still retain the ability to attack the Israeli military. So many parts of Gaza, including areas near the food distribution locations, are still an active combat zone. And Israel repeatedly makes that point when they are criticized, and they say that civilians need to stay within the designated corridor in order to queue up for the food aid distribution. So there's always going to be an element of he said, she said in these situations, and we see Israel having to confront that. But the criticism from European countries as well as countries in the Middle East, that's certainly going to continue.
Yes, Ross, and looking at that criticism and pressure being placed on the current situation, both on Israel and Hamas, given the humanitarian situation in Gaza, how significant is this UN Security Council meeting? Do you think it will actually see any difference in the ongoing trajectory of both Hamas and Israel?
That's probably unlikely, and if there is a resolution that comes up for a vote, it's likely the United States will veto it, so it wouldn't even pass the Security Council. But ultimately, there's a ceasefire proposal on the table. Israel has endorsed it, and Hamas has not. Hamas wants Israel to commit to a full withdrawal, which Israel is not willing to do. Israel is willing to commit to a fixed number of days ceasefire during which aid can resume, but hostages have to be released from or by Hamas. And it's Hamas that's not agreeing to the ceasefire. And as long as Hamas doesn't agree to the ceasefire, then it's going to be difficult to bring in food aid for the civilians.
Yes, absolutely, Ross. You will be staying with us. We, of course, will continue to bring you all of those updates from Gaza as we get them. But we now head to Europe, and Ukraine has criticised Russia for repeating old ultimatums during peace talks in Istanbul, saying they failed to advance efforts to end the 3-year war. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha stated on social media that Moscow's proposals offered no progress towards a genuine peace solution or meaningful negotiations. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky has also reshuffled military leadership following a deadly Russian missile strike on a training base. Army Chief Mikhailo Drapetya has been relieved of organisational duties and reassigned as commander of the joint forces to focus solely on combat. Drapetya had offered to resign after the attack that killed 12 soldiers, but remains valued for his leadership. Zelensky appointed Ole Apostol to lead the paratroopers, Robert Brovdy for drone forces, and Named Vadim for deputy commander of the Eastern Army Group to oversee command. Amid intense frontline pressure, Zelensky urged new sanctions on Russia after a deadly strike on Sumy. Meanwhile, Donald Trump says he's willing to sanction Russia if necessary, according to the White House. Let's have a listen in.
So he's willing to use sanctions if he needs them. In the Senate and in the Capitol Hill understand that the president is the commander-in-chief and he's leading United States foreign policy as.
Meanwhile, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan spoke with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio about peace efforts in the Russia-Ukraine war, Gaza and Syria. They discussed outcomes of the latest Ukraine-Russia talks in Istanbul, which saw ceasefire proposals but little progress. Turkey remains a key mediator, with Fidan recently meeting both Putin and Zelensky to push for more dialogue. Moving on now, and in the latest chapter of the Trump tariff story, the US is set to double tariffs on most imported steel and aluminium starting today. This escalation comes as President Donald Trump expects trading partners to present their best offers to avoid stronger import taxes on other goods, which are scheduled to take effect in early July. Yesterday, Trump signed an executive order to formally implement his recent decision to raise the tariffs on steel and aluminium from 25% to 50%, with the new rates taking effect at 12:01 a.m. today. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett said that after analysing the data, it became clear that while the initial 25% rate was helpful, a higher tariff was needed to provide additional support to the US steel industry. The tariff increase will apply to all trading partners except the United Kingdom, which has already reached a preliminary trade agreement with the US during a 90-day pause. The UK's tariff rate will remain at 25% until at least July the 9th. About 1/4 of all steel used in the US is imported, with Canada and Mexico being the largest suppliers. They are expected to be hit hardest by the increased tariffs. Canada also dominates the US aluminium import market, exporting roughly twice the amount of the next top exporters combined. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney's office said the country is engaged in intensive negotiations to have these tariffs removed. And lastly, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that the administration is monitoring China's adherence to last month's tariff agreement. She made these comments in response to questions regarding China's restrictions on rare earth minerals. Let's have a listen.
Well, I can assure you that the administration is actively monitoring China's compliance with the Geneva Trade Agreement. I know the United States, on our end, we have complied with the terms that we set, and our administration officials continue to be engaged in correspondence with their Chinese counterparts. And as you all know, and I know there's a lot of interest in it, there will be a leader-to-leader talk very soon. And when that happens, as always, we will.
Well, joining us once again to discuss the ongoing tariff tensions is Ross Feingold, political analyst, joining us of course, from Taipei. Ross, thank you for staying with us. We knew that this was coming, but now confirmed. What will be the impact of the doubling US import duties on steel and aluminium worldwide?
It certainly will raise tensions with some of the U.S. trading partners, perhaps most notably Canada, which does export a lot of steel to the United States. But it might also accelerate the willingness of trade partners to reach a deal with the Trump administration. Look, the Trump administration is being a very tough negotiator here, originally with the Liberation tariffs, now with higher steel and aluminum tariffs, while the Liberation Day tariffs are on pause. But ultimately, a lot of countries are going to be contacting the United States and are going to be looking to make a trade deal with the United States. And hopefully within the coming days and weeks, we will see those negotiations come to fruition with some of the major trading partners.
Yes, Ross, you mentioned there, of course, the Trump administration's stance on trade has very much been pushing countries towards negotiations, but some experts have warned that this could impact American business. Do you think that Trump is thinking about consumers and businesses when he's making these sometimes brash decisions, as we've seen with China and reciprocal tariffs that have escalated out of control at points?
I think President Trump is aware of the impact on American businesses, whether large companies or SMEs, and he's aware of the impact on consumers as well, but that's not changing his approach to trade negotiations with other countries. Also, an important factor to keep in mind here is that part of Trump's end game is to bring more manufacturing back to the United States. And he also understands that manufacturing in the United States often requires importing of raw materials from overseas, and if those raw materials face higher tariffs, it would make it cost prohibitive to manufacture in the United States. So I think he's aware of the risks and the downsides of his strategy, but for now he's sticking with his strategy, and it's to be a very tough negotiator. At least one country, the United Kingdom, has already reached a deal with the United States. We know that many other countries have contacted the United States, and some countries have already held several rounds of talks with the United States. So I think we should look for more deals in the coming days and weeks with the United States from some of its major trading partners.
Yes, Ross, one country that I want to focus on away from the United Kingdom is Canada. We mentioned it earlier in our summary, but of course tensions between the North American neighbours have worsened since the Trump administration took over. We know that Canada is a major exporter of steel and also aluminium to the US. What do you think this move will do for US-Canada relations amid such friction?
The interesting thing there is that there's been a lot of criticism flying back and forth from President Trump or from originally Prime Minister Trudeau and subsequently Prime Minister Carney. But when Trump and Carney have met in person, they seem to get along okay. They don't insult each other when they're meeting one-on-one. So I think there should be optimism. I think Carney understands that there's going to have to be some concessions from Canada in these negotiations. They're going to have to expand market access in Canada for things like U.S. dairy products. But I would be optimistic that the U.S. and Canada could eventually reach a deal. But there are going to be tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Trump wants to protect the domestic industry. Will it come down from 50%? Chances are high that it'll come down from 50%, but it's certainly not going to be zero.
Ross, very quickly before we end our discussion, of course, legal action ongoing. We've seen a judge blocking a move from another judge, which was looking at Trump's use of laws to put these tariffs in and trying to check that power. Trump clearly moving on. How will these impact trade discussions that are going on with multiple countries?
I think the negotiations with multiple countries will continue regardless of the litigation in the United States. We don't know how that litigation will ultimately turn out. Arguably, one of the laws that President Trump cited, giving him authority to raise tariffs, it doesn't actually give him that authority, but that's going to play out in the courts. There are other laws that President Trump could cite as giving him authority to raise tariffs as well. So the litigation side is far, far from being over. And I think in the meantime, those trading partners will continue to negotiate with the United States and try and reach a deal.
Ross Feingold, thank you ever so much for joining us on the programme. We will, of course, continue to follow all of the reactions after Trump signed that executive order, doubling the tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. But we now move to the Indo-Pacific. South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, has taken office today, promising to heal divisions and reach out to nuclear-armed North Korea. Lee vowed to deter North Korean provocations while opening channels for dialogue and peace. He won the snap elections by a wide margin over conservative Kim Moon-soo. Lee also warned that rising global protectionism and supply chain shifts threaten South Korea's export-dependent economy. The new leader assumed command of the armed forces, urging readiness but emphasizing peace over war. Lee Jae-myung warned that rising trade protectionism and supply chain changes threaten the country's survival. Speaking at his inauguration, he referenced global trade disruptions caused by US President Donald Trump's extensive tariff policies. We'll listen now to South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung.
북한 GDP의 2배에 달하는 국방비, 세계 5위의 군사력, 여기에 한미 군사 동맹에 기반한 강력한 억지력으로 북핵과 북한의 군사 도발에 대응하되 북한과의 소통 창구를 열고 대화 협력을 통해 한반도 평화를 구축해 나가겠습니다. 보호주의 확대와 공급망 재편 등 급격한 국제 질서 변화는 우리의 생존 자체를 위협합니다.
Well, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio congratulated Lee, expressing hope for cooperation. He reaffirmed the strong US-ROK alliance based on the Mutual Defence Treaty, shared values and deep economic ties between the two nations. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba seeks to boost cooperation with Lee. Despite historical disputes, Ishiba hopes for a Japan-South Korea summit and stronger ties. He acknowledges mixed South Korean views, but emphasises open dialogue and active exchanges to deepen bilateral relations. Heading back to North America now, Elon Musk is shaking up Washington, slamming President Trump's new tax and spending bill as a disgusting abomination. Musk took to social media to call out the bill's massive price tag and pork barrel spending, claiming it will deepen America's $36 trillion debt. The House passed the bill by just one vote last month. Now it heads to the Senate, controlled by Republicans, where deep divisions still remain. Fiscal conservatives are backing Musk's concerns, demanding changes to reduce deficits. Trump, however, is pushing for passage by July the 4th, calling it his one big, beautiful bill. The bill extends Trump's 2017 tax cuts, boosts defence and border spending, and could add over $3.8 trillion to the debt. Business tax breaks are also on the table, but senators may delay those to win support. Musk's comments test his political clout, coming just days after he left his role in Trump's government. The White House and Republican leaders insist they're moving forward, but the Senate math remains tight. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt dismissed Elon Musk's sharp criticism of Donald Trump's massive spending bill, saying it doesn't change the president's stance. Leavitt reaffirmed Trump's commitment to the legislation, calling it a big, beautiful bill, despite Musk labelling it as a disgusting abomination. Staying in North America, a mass shooting in Toronto's Lawrence Heights neighbourhood has left one person dead and 5 others injured. Toronto police and emergency responders rushed to the scene near Flemington and Zachary Roads, close to Ranney Avenue and Allen Road, following reports of gunfire shortly after 8:30 p.m. local time on Tuesday night. Upon arrival, officers found multiple victims suffering from gunshot wounds. Police later confirmed that one man had died. 5 other individuals sustained non-life-threatening injuries and were transported to hospital. Authorities have not released any information about suspects involved in the shooting. A command post has now been set up in the area as investigations continue. Police have yet to identify any suspects or reveal a possible motive. Further updates are expected soon. Moving on now, global automakers have raised alarms over China's tight control of critical minerals. They joined their US counterparts in warning that China's export restrictions on rare earth alloys, mixtures and magnets could cause major production delays and supply outages without a fast resolution. German car makers warn China's export curbs could halt production, disrupt economies. This follows India's EV maker complaint. According to analysts, Beijing's April mineral ban has shaken global supply chains across auto, aerospace, tech and defence industries. Meanwhile, President Trump plans to invoke emergency powers to cut legal hurdles, including some congressional funding approvals under a law aimed at boosting US production of critical minerals and weapons. This, according to a Reuters-sourced document. Trump's action would apply the Defense Production Act as a US law that gives the president broad powers to manage domestic industries and resources during national security emergencies. The document, expected to be published on the Federal Register today, shows that Trump previously used the Korean War-era law in March to boost domestic critical mineral production for consumer goods, computer chips, robotics and advanced weaponry. The law requires congressional approval for projects over $50 million and a one-year deadline, but the president can waive this in an emergency, and Trump is expected to do so, according to reports. The White House hasn't yet commented. Former President Joe Biden also used similar waivers to speed up vaccine and medical equipment production during the COVID-19 pandemic. Heading back to the Middle East, and Israel has launched another round of military strikes on Syria after 2 projectiles were reportedly fired from Syrian territory towards Israel. In response, the Israeli military says it targeted weapons facilities belonging to the Syrian government in southern Syria, marking the second such strike within hours. Israeli mortars also reportedly hit areas near Daraa, close to the Golan Heights. Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant directly blamed Syrian leadership for the escalation. He declared Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa directly responsible for any fire or threat originating from Syrian soil, vowing a full response. Meanwhile, the Syrian Foreign Ministry says reports of projectiles fired at Israel have not been verified and cautioned that Syria poses no threat to anyone. Damascus says some forces may be trying to destabilize the region to serve their own interests. Heading back to the Indo-Pacific, and Lai Ching-te, the president of Taiwan, marked the 36th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square crackdown by honouring the courage of those who protested for democracy in 1989. He stressed that human rights are a universal value shared by democracies around the world, and not just a part of history to be remembered, but a principle to be upheld daily. Lai criticised authoritarian regimes for trying to erase history, saying that democratic societies choose to preserve the truth and honour those who sacrificed for freedom. He also reiterated Taiwan's commitment to these core values, despite Beijing's opposition to his leadership. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio commemorated the bravery of the Chinese people who lost their lives during the crackdown and those who continue to seek justice for the events of June 4th, 1989. He pointed out that while the Chinese Communist Party seeks to censor and suppress the truth, the world will never forget the sacrifices made in the pursuit of fundamental freedoms. Moving on now, a tragic highway accident in northern Mexico has left 11 people dead and more than 20 others injured. The incident occurred in the town of Hualahuises in Nuevo Leon state when a bus overturned en route to Tampico in neighbouring Tamaulipas. Local authorities say the passengers were mostly tourists. Emergency responders rushed to the scene following reports of the crash. Road accidents have been on the rise across Mexico, often blamed on poor vehicle maintenance, reckless driving or driver fatigue. This comes just months after one of the country's deadliest crashes, where 38 people were killed in a collision. And moving to sport now, Indian batsman Virat Kohli has led Royal Challengers Bangalore to victory as they defeated Punjab Kings by 6 runs to secure their first Indian Premier League title. Kohli scored 43 runs off 35 balls at the top of the order, helping Bengaluru post a strong total of 190 for 9, which proved too much for the resilient Punjab side that fought hard but finished at 184 for 7. Over 91,000 fans filled the 132,000 capacity stadium in Ahmedabad after the win. 36-year-old Kohli, one of India's greatest ever cricketers across all formats, collapsed to the ground before rising to be embraced by his teammates, while the crowd cheered for their hero. Punjab's chase was hampered when left-arm spinner Krunal Pandya picked up 2 wickets for just 17 runs in his 4 overs. Well, that is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.